On behalf of the Hanson family, I just want to welcome you. Whether you're a relative, a neighbor, an acquaintance, or a teammate, we're all family here. And you're part of our family by being here. I'm Larry, and I'm standing here by default, as my siblings, along with their poor judgment, insisted that I'm the emotionally strong one. Think of the irony. You're way ahead of me. For those of you who don't know, I was blessed and born with a spiritual gift, or what I refer to as my superpower. I have this uncanny ability to produce excess moisture behind my eyes when I speak in public. You think I'm kidding? Mom thinks I should have came with a warning label. Good news is, I know what triggers it. It's fond, happy memories. After proving this at our 4 children's weddings, one would think it'd be easier. But the other news is I've been doing some self-diagnosis, and there is no off button. I've always been impressed how the life of Jesus, with all his ancestry, teachings, his travels, his mission, stories of transformation, were all preserved in a book called the Bible. God always chose ordinary people to fulfill his plan. I thought it'd be appropriate today to reflect on Dad's life and the path that God laid out for him. One of Dad's favorite verses was Psalms 139:23. It says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." There was nothing impure in my dad's heart. Words that describe Dad are gentle, tender, kind, loving. He couldn't get through an episode of Little House on the Prairie without crying. Laughter, courageous, competitive, selfless, sacrifice. Dad had a very special lifetime relationship with his sister Carol and his brother Lyle. They all lived within 10 miles of each other their whole life and never had a harsh word to each other. Dad met his wife Carol on a blind date Friday the 13th as they were dined at Rosie's Supper Club in Grand Falls with Dale and Ramona Thompson. To seal the deal and win her over, Mom's sister Jan at the drive-in, Dad was noted to be a pretty good tipper to her. They were married March 18th, 1961 at the Big Bend Lutheran Church. Lynn and Carol first had a daughter named Lori and went to NDSU to become a home ec teacher. She taught school and presently ventured into her own embroidery business. Lori is an amazing creative and perfectionist at her talent. Dad truly admired that in you. Next, I came along and became Dad's sidekick. I just wanted to be around Dad all the time. I learned by observation. I went to STSU to become a mechanical engineer and design machinery that wouldn't break down. That plan got altered and I designed aircraft production facilities instead. It was easier. Last but not least was my brother Dave. He loved to be on the farm. Dad would bring Dave and set him on the floor of the combine as a toddler. Dave was around 8 years old when one day the combine started on fire. Dave jumped from the cab deck. I guess you could say he was a hot mess. But we're only going to focus on the positive today. Dave graduated from STSU and KU and now is a physical therapist in Kansas City. Dad was all about family. He loved to share stories of his aunts and uncles, and especially his beloved cousins. The whole laugh was contagious, and usually followed by numerous knee slaps. Lynn's highly unique and audible laugh could only be described as something between a Snoopy laugh and a release of a helium balloon as it expends its air. Lynn and Carol had 8 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren that they were extremely proud of. He loved to talk about what they were doing, how their recitals, their ball games, races each week. And he would ask, "What's your last name again?" And they say, "Hanson." And they go, "I'm pretty proud of it." I have so many fond memories of Dad growing up. At 5 years old, we crossed the yard to go shut the yard hydrant off at the stock tank. And at 5 years old, I'm jumping in the snow from one footprint to the other in his big old boots. At that point, I knew I had big shoes to fill my whole life. Dad always trusted giving us responsibilities, even at a young age. I loved being left to feed the cattle and plow, and he went deer hunting up north in the fall. I never wanted to disappoint him. I always remember staying up late. My bedroom was just off the TV room, and the door was cracked about this far. I was supposed to be in bed, but I was only 5. And I'd sit and look through that crack, and Dad was watching old war movies. I just wish I had the courage that those men had, like my dad had. Dad probably served in the Army in 1951 to 1953. Those 2 years were the most important 2 years of his life, as he often spoke of those experiences that shaped his abilities, his attitude, his self-discipline, his survival skills. Yeah, all of which prepared him for farming. Dad, being a farmer, was used to working with heavy equipment. Learned to drive a tank in the Army, but was mostly a company clerk. With his flawless typing skills during his service, his commanding officer gave him high accolades at his job. 3 times, Dad volunteered to go train in Iceland and then ship off to fight in Korea. 3 times, his commanding officer declined him and insisted that he needed him to stay. Dad, in his typical humor, used to tell us at the end of the war, they found out Lynn Hanson was coming, and they couldn't handle it. The war ended. They knew they'd met their match. I think our family's presence here today proves what a great intuition his commanding officer had. During the last few years of my professional career, I used to call Dad on the way to work every day, just to hear his voice and get some words of wisdom. Dad was full of wisdom. He always had an answer to everything. Somehow he was able to encourage me by telling me a story of something that happened in his life in his service in the Army. All of a sudden, my worries seemed minuscule in comparison. Some of the things that Dad passed on to his kids from his years of service is you can't outwork a Hanson. Dad had a great work ethic, and we all admired that in the quality of our dad. Things may be tough, but you never heard him complain. He would always push through, and pain couldn't stop him. Dad's farm flooded the first 9 out of 10 years that he farmed before we moved 3 miles north away from the creek. Income statement during one of those prosperous years was for $400. Just think of raising 3 kids on that. He often stated, "We were so poor, we didn't even know it." But perseverance and faith changed that outcome. Secondly, he taught us you can do far more than you think you can. Even though Dad had a high school diploma and never got to go to college because he was farming, Dad somehow received his self-prescribed doctorate in psychology. If you want to get something done, just tell a Hanson you can't do it.
Yes.
This is how he was able to convince us to do one more round in the bean field every day before heading back for lunch. He was a master of making us do things beyond our comfort level. Jolly Rogers and root beer barrel candies, which he called vitamins, were the perfect drag to keep us kids in the field one more round. Boy, were we naive. Dad taught us about sacrifice. Dad sacrificed a lot for us. Because farming wasn't demanding enough, Lynn sold Pioneer seed corn for 24 years to completely pay for all three of us kids to go to school. It was important to him. During that 24 years, he always met his sales quota. He was given 10% increase each year. Never once did he go seek out a new customer. They came to him, and even dealers of other seed corn companies came to him. Looking back, we just didn't have the heart to tell Dad that it was probably Mom's caramel rolls that brought it. Actually, as time-consuming and demanding as seed corn sales were, on top of farming full-time, Pioneer became Dad's mission field. Dad was compassionate. He would spend hours walking the fields and talking with his customers. He knew when they were hurting after a hailstorm or financially strapped. He was a great listener. He had strong shoulders to carry those burdens with you guys. I'd recently seen a quote that said, Dad must have been thinking through those years of his Army service. The true soldier does not fight. True soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. Dad loved to hunt deer. For 40 years, he went rifle hunting up in War Road, Minnesota by the Canadian border with his dad, his uncles, cousins, friends, neighbors. You know you're a legend when there's a story witnessed by many here in this building today, just a few miles away from here. It is referred to as that shot. As a witness myself, we watched Dad draw a recurve bow, no high-tech compound bow or sights, leading and arching a deer on the dead run, at least 60 yards away, hopping and jumping. Dad draws his bow, lets it go, puts his bow down by his side and says, I think it's all coming together. And the deer ran smack into the arrow. We always thought, what a dumb deer. He thought it was skill, but we know. In Canada, I loved his passion and excitement to go. Many years he said that if he didn't get away and escape the stress of droughts, he didn't know what he'd do. It was a much needed break, an escape from farming stresses. When we got back home and the rain had come, it was even sweeter. He would spend an entire year looking for the best lure that would catch the big one. One year my brother Dave and I got a photo album that we gave him for Christmas. And on the cover it said, my fishing memories. The thing is, we only put pictures of Dave and our fish in it. We still laugh about it. I'm pretty sure it was Dave's idea, I just went along with it. Another quote that Dad shared on one of those fishing trips was, you never remember the things that go right because you take them for granted, but you'll always remember the things that go wrong. I think we'll remember this funeral for a long time. Whether it was a flat tire, a broken boat trailer hitch, a really bad storm blowing in, losing your best lure, a cracked hull on the boat, taking in water, motor troubles, breaking and losing your rod, Dave? We remember all those experiences during our fishing trips. We never remember the sun-filled days catching fish because we took them for granted. The competitive card games at night was just icing on the cake. Dad loved to bowl. As a kid, we missed him leaving the house to go bowling, but in the morning we got up, there would be our favorite candy bar on the table. I've heard how competitive the bowling got with Dad and Lyle. It was Pioneer versus Dakota Egg Boys. As the night was winding down and teams were finishing, there's all kinds of loud commotion and a couple lanes with hooting and hollering. Everyone had moved over to watch Lynn and Lyle finish up, as it became quite the event for captain in the evening. Dad loved baseball. Everything was about competition. He loved baseball, bowling, horseshoes, cards, fishing, just about anything that his brother Lyle was doing. Looking back, there's only 3 things that I could come up with that Dad hated. He hated cell phones, he hated computers, and more than anything, he hated losing to his brother Lyle. The stories of them growing up and playing baseball together are legendary. They used to play catch, not just any catch, but the goal was to break each other's hand. They truly loved each other. They just had a strange way of showing it. Dad first started playing junior legion baseball in Gary, South Dakota. The first game he pitched, he struck out 9 out of the first 10 batters. He was so upset. He thought it was his job to strike everybody out. That was his perspective. Lynn also played with Canby, Dawson, then over to Madison, eventually when they got their lights. Lost my place. Not uncommon to have over 1,000 fans show up to the baseball game in Madison during those years before TV took over our entertainment. After a full day of farming, they would head to town to play baseball. Grandpa used to let him drive the tractor on baling day if that was the day he was going to be pitching, as if it was a restful day off. Dad started farming around age 14. He wanted to do farming his whole life. He loved the responsibility. He loved his John Deere machinery, his cattle. He loved the accomplishment of growing crops and harvesting them. He first bought a baler, and he used it for custom baling. Got to know all the neighbors for 8 cents a bale, and that became his community and lifelong relationships. Another favorite farming memory of Dad was when he was cultivating corn and I was riding back and forth on the road by our house. Dad was out to the west a half a mile turning around, sun going down, the silhouette of a tractor, and all I could hear was, "Then sings my soul, my Savior God to thee." I think he's singing to his plants, hoping that his corn would grow just like his mom and her plants. What a great memory. In his lifetime, Dad farmed over 71 years, retired at age 85, and got to see farming technology change from horse-drawn equipment to mechanized tractors, and now is amazed at the modern-day GPS and computerized data of modern-day farming. One of the stories of Dad being introduced to the GPS tractors is Jeff and Dan letting him ride in the tractors. They planted several rounds. Jeff and Dan asked him, "Well, Lynn, what do you think of this new technology? The tractor drives itself." "Well," Dad said, "congratulations. You can plant as straight as I can now." He wasn't going to concede. During Dad's last days in Madison Hospital, Dad put on his twins' hat and jacket in hand and said to Mom, "I'm ready to go home now." Thank God has a unique way of preparing us. Days later, Lynn began saying Jesus loves me. Not once or twice, but for hours on end. It didn't end there. He sang certain phrases and various hymns throughout the day and through the night. This went on for 4 days and 4 nights. He sang his responses to any questions that the nurses had or that we had as a family. He basically gave us a concert to the nurses' station outside his door. We knew where his heart was at. Whose footsteps are you following in? Job 23, verse 10 and 11 says, "But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. My feet have closely followed in his steps. I have kept to his way without turning aside." We've had a great dad to be able to follow in his footsteps throughout our lives. We're blessed because we know Dad walked in the footsteps of Jesus. Thanks for leading the way, Dad.